And the youngest ones of that team, who are the oldest one in next year's team, when they're preparing, they said, look, if we don't have a vehicle that is at least 400, we won't even go there. And it's that kind of things. Where do you put the stretch in your mind? Right, I already said that talent should be seen as a pipeline. So you have to manage the input. We talked a lot about that today. How do we get more inflow? We also have to look at the throughput. And I heard somebody talk today, somebody who talked about clinical psychiatry or psychology, that it's better to let somebody find out early on that that is maybe not your cup of tea so that you don't displace somebody else out there. And then equally, we have to manage the output. Where do those people go in society? And that is where the ERTs come in. So our assumption is the following. Society's most valuable resource is human ingenuity. And societies, therefore, should allocate that most valuable resource to address the most pressing challenges. And if it is a valuable resource, you have to pay attention on how you manage that resource. Think about talent in terms of pipeline management. It's got long lead times. It may be from 6 to 14-year-olds to a 20 to 25 to 30-year-old engineer who makes his first breakthrough invention. And I think that you mentioned this morning Ernest Rutherford. He happens to be my favorite Nobel Prize winner as well. Not for what he invented, but for the fact that he spawned most other Nobel Prize winners. Now, is it possible that the students that worked for him were so much more intelligent than the students that worked for other Nobel Prize winners? I don't think so. What it does say is that Ernest Rutherford had a gift. I didn't know what you said, we have no money, therefore we have to think harder. He had a gift to inspire his students to go on to great things. And that is why teachers are so very, very important. And we have to act early to avoid problems later. Now, Svein Sjöberg is a professor who I would recommend you invite perhaps next year at his conference. He's done a number of studies that all carry the names of flowers. So this is a result of the ROSE study, and ROSE stands for the relevance of science education, or the relevance of STEM education. Now I know you can't read what's in here because the letters are too small, but basically from top to bottom you got the countries ranked by Human Development Index, the lowest at the top and the highest at the bottom. Across the top you got from 0 to 100% the degree of agreement of 14 to 15-year-olds with the question, I would like to become a scientist. And what you can see, people from Uganda, Ghana, Lesotho, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, very high proportion would like to become scientists. By the way, blue is boys and red is girls. And what you can see, there's a correlation that as the development of the economy goes up and the Human Development Index, actually we want to become scientists ever less. Now, perhaps that is an extreme question. White coat, glasses, laboratory, microscope. Let's ask a more general question. I would like to get a job in technology. Now, how many jobs these days do we have that do not have to do with technology? What you see is slightly less extreme, but a similar pattern, slightly bigger spread between gender, and note in particular the position of Japan. Some speakers talked about Japan. I've lived in Japan for 5 years. They have a bigger demographic problem than we have. They have many more grey people in their pyramid. Secondly, they have an absolute no-no for immigrant talent. And their own indigenous people think this about jobs in technology. So I've presented this to Keidanren, the Japanese CBI, and said, you guys are facing a wall at relatively high speed. Because who is going to run Japan Inc. if you're not going to address either demography, either STEM interest, or reassess your immigration policy? The ERT did a piece of research ourselves. We used the ROSE report as well, and we did a piece of research in some 23 countries, and we found the following 3 findings. First of all, as countries evolve economically, we become wealthier and we become more proficient users of technology. Please check your handbags and your pockets have BlackBerry, mobile phone, GPS, navigation system in the car. We all have that, right? Everyone in the room. So we become more proficient users of technology. Paradoxically, we have become less interested in technology. And when I read that for the first time, I said, that can't be right. Why can that be? And if you think about it a bit deeper, there are a couple of reasons for that. When I studied at Oxford, that's when I had my first car. It was an old Peugeot 404. many of you, well, some of you may know this, looked a bit like an Austin or more Cambridge, with the vertical lights at the back. And on a morning like this, it would not start, because, hey, it was a French car. But I knew exactly what to do. You open the bonnet, take off the distributor cap, take off my handkerchief, dry the contact points, close it again, put on the clips, close the bonnet, give it a kiss because it's a French car, on the bonnet, get in, and she would start. And you would drive. I now have 2 German cars. They always start, whatever the weather is. And if one morning they wouldn't start, I have no chance in hell to even begin to think where to look. So it is both the complexity of the technology on the one hand, you can't do it yourself anymore. Secondly, the reliability, it doesn't break down anymore. But that is not something that happens automatically. That happens because there are lots of good engineers. And thirdly, not for everything, but for example, for your mobile phone, have you ever seen anyone fiddle with screwdrivers in a mobile phone? It goes that way, and for £25 you buy a new one. However, this does have consequences. Because in order to improve something, you first have to understand where it is now. And that has led to the second finding of the ERT study, that indeed, that as countries get wealthier, the interest of the young in STEM subjects declines. And the third finding, and fasten your seatbelts, especially those that are teachers, because you may not like this, the job that has declined most in status over the last 30 years is that of teacher. And 30 years ago, if you're the best and the brightest in the class, you'd consider to become a teacher. It's pain in my heart that I have to say, but sometimes now, if you can't do anything else, become a teacher. But the enormity of that statement is very telling, because teachers are extremely important, because they educate the generation that have to address the problems that I earlier described. So we've got a talent challenge, and well, you know all these statistics, so I go through this quickly. So declining STEM student propulsion, stabilization of access to tertiary education, unfavorable demographic trends also in Europe, and hesitant attitudes. And what's interesting in there, that Sven Scherbeck has written about it as well, young people today do not think like we or I did when I was younger on what you would want to become, but more who you want to become. So for example, many young people today actually have got their heart in the right place. They want to care. They want to care for society. They want to care for the planet, because whilst maybe not knowing all the details that I said here, they do feel that we are living in a very fast-going roller coaster and want to do something about it. So what we need to do now is to say why STEM skills can actually be helpful to become the persons that they want to be. So it's helpful to achieve their own chosen objectives. And again, lead time and lag time thinking, that boy and those girls can be Nobel Prize winners in 2060. Because the Nobel Prize winners in 50 years are amongst us. We don't know who they are. We don't know whether they're boys or girls, whether they got blonde curly hair or light black hair, but they are somewhere. And if you look at the mean age of Nobel Prize winners, they are this age right now. So the question is, what can we do now to help them to do those kind of things that will lead to a Nobel Prize in 2060, and of course, more importantly, to the inventions that they will do that help address the challenges. I'll skip this because we went through understanding the cause and the effect, but many people have spoken about it far more elaborately than I could possibly do. It's the rationale for education, role models, you've spoken about that, information of what you can do with STEM skills. We then talked about a strategy, how should we do that? Basic line here is, many parties need to cooperate together, schools, researchers that do the analysis, the governments obviously, but also industry. And ERT believes that industry has an important role to play, and I heard many of you echo that today. And there are actually quite a number of very good partnerships in Europe that are successful. Wissensfabrik in Germany, C'est Génial in France, JetNet in the Netherlands, Matena in Sweden, but they're all small and they're isolated. Now the problem is that education is not something that the European Commission can command and control, and possibly they shouldn't, because that is clearly within the member states. But what we've said to the EU is perhaps you can do more about best practice sharing and trying to make more name and shame lists amongst the EU member states to actually show to those that are performing worst that they have to pull up their socks.